Hey everyone, I'm your host Adrian. We do content like this weekly, so hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified. If you want more content like this, click the like button and please leave a comment. Thanks again for watching.
All right, so today we're really going to be starting out by focusing on this strain called Akkermansia. And I think I just wanted to kick off with kind of a high level overview. The microbiome is a word and a phrase that we've been hearing more and more about over time. And one of the big reasons is because the amount of research in the microbiome has really been expanding over time. And we now know that the microbiome is linked to and plays an important role in a lot of systems in our body. So going from where we kind of originally thought about probiotics, which is in the GI tract, and targeting things like inflammatory bowel disease, to starting to get outside of just that area and really going into things like colorectal cancer. We know that the microbiome plays a role in metabolic syndrome, including type 1 and type 2 diabetes. It's starting to become clear that it also even plays a role in things like allergies and asthma, and even starting to get to the brain with this gut-brain axis link that is becoming more and more elucidated. And we now believe that the microbiome plays a really important role in diseases that we traditionally have thought of as being neurological, like autism and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And so this really is an expanding space of knowledge, but it is still a new science. And so very excited to share some of the latest information with you guys. Probably the first lesson is, what is the gut microbiome and where is it located? And part of the thing to note is that the gut microbiome is actually located in the distal colon. When we talk about that area, it has this character trait to it, which is that it is strictly anaerobic. By the time you get through the stomach and the GI tract and to the distal colon where the gut microbiome strains are, there is no oxygen there. And the reason that's important is because when you want to study the gut microbiome and when you want to start to cultivate these strains, you have to figure out how to grow them in an environment that doesn't have any oxygen. And so one of the important things that we've learned is that even measuring these strains and trying to understand their viability is a place for innovation. And so here on this plot, I'm showing you on the right-hand side CFUs. And this is something that if you've looked at probiotics labels, you'll know that this is a familiar term. It stands for colony forming units. And basically, it's exactly what the name sounds like. You take your culture, you spread it on a petri dish, and you simply count how many colonies appear. And that tells you how many viable cells you have. And that translates to colony forming units and a number that you slap onto a label. In contrast, there's a different technology, which is flow cytometry, in which you can measure active fluorescent units. And so here you can see an example of an image that comes out of flow cytometry. I'm sorry about the resolution here, but each of those dots on there is the equivalent of one colony on a plate. And so the first thing you can see is that you get so much more data when you run flow cytometry compared to when you count colonies on a plate. The second thing you can see is that the green dots here represent live cells, the red dots represent dead cells, and the gray are kind of somewhere in the middle. And so what you're seeing here is the entire composition of what's in your culture or what's in your tube. And it is telling you how many are alive in there and how many are dead in there and the total number of cells that are actually in your product. And so in contrast to colony forming units, you now know much more comprehensively what's the composition of the thing that you're looking at. And so I think that what we'll find is that over time, as we get more sophisticated about the gut microbiome and gut microbes, we'll start to see a shift of people talking about colony forming units into looking at active fluorescent units. So Akkermansia is kind of one of the most interesting strains that's come out of gut microbiome research. And I would argue that it's becoming known as a keystone strain in the microbiome. And the reason why people are viewing it as a keystone strain is because of its important role in the mucosal layer. It's basically the only strain that we know of right now that literally lives in the mucus lining. And I'm going to talk about what it's doing there and why that becomes so important. But the other reason that this is starting to emerge as a keystone strain is because it actually represents 1 to 3% of a healthy gut microbiome. That is a huge percentage. It is doing something really important because it's so prevalent. And one of the issues is that when you don't have enough Akkermansia, you're actually lower than these amounts. It's starting to become clear that that's associated with a wide variety of conditions. And so just to give a framework for when Akkermansia came onto the scene, this is the number of publications on Akkermansia over time. And you can see that before 2010, we literally knew almost nothing about Akkermansia. And that's because of this strict anaerobe component, but also because DNA sequencing technologies just became available to us kind of in the early 2000s. And it's the application of DNA sequencing that's enabled us to even survey the microbiome and to identify this Akkermansia strain. And from there, you can just see this exponential growth in the number of publications and how much we're learning about Akkermansia over time. And so what are some of the things that we know about Akkermansia so far? Well, I'm showing you here a diagram of kind of what's known to date in terms of the mechanism of action and what it does. So at the top of this is a picture of Akkermansia with little tentacles coming out of it. And there's three specific pathways that I want to point out here. The first thing is that we know that there's a protein on the surface of Akkermansia called AMUC 1100, and it binds to the TLR2 receptors in the gut microbiome lining. And that stimulates gut barrier integrity as well as plays a role in immune homeostasis. The second pathway to point out here is short chain fatty acids or SCFAs. And in particular, Akkermansia is able to produce propionate, which is a precursor to producing butyrate. Butyrate is a small molecule that's been known for a long time to be a really important small molecule in the gut microbiome. And one of the reasons it's so important is because it binds to G protein coupled receptors, in particular GPR41 and GPR44. And when it binds to those receptors, that stimulates the production of GLP-1 from L cells. And GLP-1 has sort of become famous or infamous lately as a really important small molecule when it comes to insulin and glucose tolerance. And GLP-1 plays a role in stimulating insulin response, and so plays an important role in blood glucose control. And also, it appears to play an important role in satiety. And so, in a combination of improving people's insulin responses and improving their satiety, people experience really great results in terms of weight management. The third thing that we know about Akkermansia to date is that it secretes a small protein called P9. And P9 binds to the ICAM2 receptors in these L cells. And again, that stimulates GLP-1. And so at the end of the day, Akkermansia has been tied to immune homeostasis, gut barrier integrity, weight management, and blood glucose controls. Four of kind of the most important things that are happening in our body and systems that our microbiome is playing an important role in. So one of the earliest times in which we understood that Akkermansia might be important was in the American Gut Project. So this was a survey of over 10,000 participants from ages 20 to 99, in which the group basically just looked at microbiomes across populations of individuals. And one of the things that they observed was that your BMI and your levels of Akkermansia are inversely correlated. In other words, the less Akkermansia you had, the worse your BMI was. And they actually accounted for the fact that people in the study had different ages, they were different sexes, different smoking, alcohol, drinking, diet, and country. They normalized for all of that. And this relationship between Akkermansia and BMI lasted even through removing all of those other factors. And so it really did appear that Akkermansia and BMI are somehow related to each other across all populations. So as a carry on to that or a follow on to that, there's this really great study in which they're really trying to understand what is the relationship between Akkermansia and your response to dieting. And what they found was that people who have higher amounts of Akkermansia in their gut microbiome actually respond better to diets. And when I say they respond better to diets, the key things that they were measuring here were fasting glucose, waist to hip ratio, and subcutaneous adipocyte diameter. And so what they found was that if you had high amounts of Akkermansia versus somebody who had low amounts of Akkermansia and you were obese and you both went on the same diet, if you had the higher levels of Akkermansia, you actually had better outcomes on that same diet in terms of fasting blood glucose, triglyceride levels, and body fat distribution. And it might be kind of the beginnings to the answer of, hey, how come me and this other person can eat the same foods and yet this person is gaining weight in a different way than I am? And so Akkermansia and its metabolism of food starts to become a really important factor in that. Further studies really started to understand, okay, well, what is Akkermansia doing, in this gut lining? And one of the things that we know is that Akkermansia plays an incredibly important role in the mucin layer. So the mucin layer is sort of the glue in our gut lining. And I often like to think of this as a wooden picket fence. I actually have a wooden picket fence in my backyard. And when we first moved in here, all the wooden planks were really strong, held together by glue. Everything was wonderful. And what can happen over time through just different seasons and time itself is that those planks can start to weaken. Everything gets a little bit less shiny and new. And sometimes those planks can fall. And your gut lining is literally the exact same thing. You have these cells, these planks that are really constituting your gut lining, and you have the glue that holds them together, which is the mucin layer. And Akkermansia's job all day and all night is to basically be situated at this mucin layer and regulated to strip down the old mucin to put up new mucin. And so this role in the gut lining becomes really, really pivotal to its role in all of these other pathways. And so what this paper is showing is that Akkermansia's the mucus thickness of the gut lining is associated with Akkermansia, and that by giving this mouse model Akkermansia supplementation, they could actually improve the mucin thickness, and that supported healthy aging in this animal model. And then just to take that one step further, there have been a couple of papers that come out and show this, but essentially, if you look at the microbiome in centennials, so people who are kind of getting into this extremely old age, you see that they have high levels of Akkermansia. And so there's kind of this really interesting hypothesis that Akkermansia is playing a role in your blood glucose control and in your mucin layer, and that having higher levels of it are associated with longevity. And so Pendulum is actually the only company that has figured out how to grow Akkermansia. As you might imagine, first of all, it's a strict anaerobe, so it can't have any oxygen in the system. The second thing is that it lives in a mucin lining. And so trying to figure out how to manufacture this outside of the gut lining has actually been a huge challenge that lots of people have been trying to do internationally and in the US. Pendulum is the only company that sells it. And the key things it does is it strengthens gut lining, it helps to boost GLP-1 production, and it's really a keystone strain for gut health. So not only can you think about Akkermansia as a single keystone strain and its important role, but it's also important to recognize that the microbiome is an ecosystem. And so Akkermansia has other strains that it actually plays with and interacts with in order to have these different functions. And so I know this is a pretty complicated slide, but I'm going to try to walk us through it in terms of thinking about Akkermansia in the context of this microbiome ecosystem. So on the top left here, I'm going to talk about these specific strains and how they interact with Akkermansia. So we're going to be talking about Clostridium butyricum, Clostridium beijerinki, anaerobe Butyricum heli, and Bifidobacterium infantis. If we start at the top kind of middle section where the guy is eating a pill there, this is sort of where it all starts. So if you are ingesting these strains along with fibers and polyphenols, what happens when these get to the gut microbiome are a few different things. So the first is that these strains act in concert to metabolize those fibers into short-chain fatty acids. And the one we're really going to focus in on here is butyrate. And so butyrate is, again, this really important small molecule that plays a variety of different roles in gut health. But what we're going to focus in on here is the ability for butyrate to bind to those G protein coupled receptors in the L cells and stimulate GLP-1 release. And when GLP-1 is released, that has a variety of positive impacts. And there's sort of a list here on the bottom right, which is that increases in GLP-1 are associated with increases in insulin secretion, insulin sensitivity, reduced glucagon secretion, and improvement in beta cell health, increases in satiety and glucose control, and improved metabolic health, and really a reduction in systemic inflammation. And so these strains, which help metabolize fiber into butyrate, really play this important role in increasing GLP-1. In the meantime, Akkermansia and polyphenols are known to act in concert with each other to increase Akkermansia levels. And as I mentioned, Akkermansia produces butyrate, which then is an upstream molecule, which can then increase butyrate production. But in addition to that, because Akkermansia plays this role in the mucin layer, in the bottom left here, you can see that one of the other things that's been observed is that when you have Akkermansia, you have increased mucin production and increased barrier function and gut immunity homeostasis. But conversely, when you have a thinning mucin layer, that can lead to the development of gut dysbiosis and allows pathogenic bacteria to infiltrate the systemic circulation. And of course, this is the beginnings of the kind of bacteria that you don't want in your circulation. And so that mucin layer and that mucin regulation is really important for keeping the good things in and the bad things out. In addition to the mucin layer and the butyrate and GLP-1 production, we also know that these strains actually act together to produce some secondary bile acids. And so what I'm showing over here is that one of these secondary acids is UDCA. And we know that actually Clostridium butyricum plays an important role here and is able to stimulate GLP-1 production through the production of UDCA. And so there's a variety of different pathways here from metabolic syndrome to immunity to mucin layer and pathogenic bacteria that are all kind of acting, which are all kind of the result of these different strains acting in concert with each other. And so one of the kind of really important studies looking at whether these strains really do work together and what could they do in terms of helping people with metabolic syndrome is shown in this publication. So this was a 12-week double-blinded placebo-controlled randomized trial where a formulation which had all 5 of those strains that I just showed to you were tested. And then there was also a subset of them tested, a 3-strain formulation. That 3-strain formulation did not include Akkermansia muciniphila or anaerobic hali. And what was discovered here was that in these patients that have type 2 diabetes, if you gave them placebo or the 3 strains or the full 5 strains, they actually had very different changes in their A1C and AUC. So people who were given pendulum glucose control, which is the entirety of those 5 strains, compared to people who were given placebo, saw that their A1C through the course of this trial went down by 0.6 and that their blood glucose spikes went down by 33%. And so this is a really nice placebo-controlled, double-blinded randomized trial in which we can see that the microbiome is really an opportunity to help people lower A1C and AUC in ways that we haven't really been able to do before. In addition, there was sort of this kind of small pilot study looking at people with prediabetes. And so in this study, this is a study which uses CGM data, so continuous glucose monitor data. And I'll give the caveat, this is a very small pilot study. There's only 3 people in this that we're going to show here, where they had a continuous glucose monitor that they wore. And this was a crossover design in which they were either given the placebo first or the pendulum glucose control product first. And then there was a washout period, and then they were given the other thing. And they were, the oral glucose tolerance test here is really a boost field tolerance test where they are given a boost. They sort of fast whole night, and in the morning they take a boost, and you're basically looking at the glucose response. And so what you can see here is that for all 3 of these participants in the study, when they were on placebo, they had a certain glucose spike. But then when they were on pendulum glucose control, for every single one of them, the area under the curve of that spike went down. One of the great things about continuous glucose monitors, though, is that you don't just have to look at a single oral glucose tolerance test. You actually get data for the people across the entirety of the time in which they are wearing the CGM. And one of the things that we observed is that people tend to have kind of their favorite breakfast. And so there's a breakfast that most people have multiple times a week. And so we did and said, okay, let's take a look at that breakfast and the area under the curve every time this person eats their favorite breakfast. And what you can see for each of these individuals is that over time, when they were on placebo, their response to their breakfast was more or less unchanged. And each black dot represents the time that they had that breakfast. In contrast, when they were on pendulum glucose control over that same time period, you can see that over time, for every single one of these folks, when they ate their favorite breakfast, their area under the curve for their glucose spikes actually decreased. And so this was sort of exciting to think about, how can we potentially help people that are in the pre-diabetic range start to improve the way that their body metabolizes sugars, but also how their body metabolizes the sugars within the food that they're kind of consuming on a day-to-day basis. And so pendulum glucose control is that full formulation, the clinical grade formulation, which was tested in people with type 2 diabetes. And it has been shown to lower both A1C and lower blood glucose spikes. There's a second product that we recently released just this year, and it's called Metabolic Daily. Metabolic Daily has literally the exact same strains as pendulum glucose control, but it's at a lower dose. And so the idea here is that pendulum glucose control is really for people who have type 2 diabetes and are trying to lower their A1C and their blood glucose spikes and get those clinical results with that clinical grade formulation. And for people who are trying to manage the way that their body metabolizes sugars, they should be taking Metabolic Daily. And so Metabolic Daily has been shown to help reduce sugar cravings. It helps metabolize sugars and carbs more efficiently and really just boost metabolism for anybody who's trying to boost their metabolism, and they don't necessarily have to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. In addition to these formulations which contain Akkermansia and the Akkermansia strain itself, there are other components which can actually also help boost Akkermansia activity and Akkermansia levels. The most well-known of which is polyphenols. So before Akkermansia was available on the market, the only way you could really recommend for people to increase their Akkermansia levels is to ask them to increase the amount of polyphenols that they were intaking. And so there have been a variety of studies which have shown that polyphenols are really important for increasing Akkermansia levels, but also important for metabolic syndrome. And so we essentially studied a wide panel of different types of polyphenols and selected the polyphenols which acted in concert with our Akkermansia strain. And so from those studies, we selected pomegranate extract, green tea extract, and grapeseed extract polyphenols. And that created this formulation of polyphenols, which can help boost Akkermansia. In addition to polyphenols, the other way to think about synergistic activities with Akkermansia is through the strain Clostridium butyricum. And as I mentioned before, the microbiome is an ecosystem. No strain really acts entirely independently of the other strains. And so we know that Akkermansia can work with Clostridium butyricum to produce butyrate. Akkermansia and polyphenols essentially can stimulate the production of propionate, which gets converted into butyrate by Clostridium butyricum. So when you put these two together, you're really boosting your butyrate levels. And it's possible that somebody might have wonderful amounts of Akkermansia, but they're low in Clostridium butyricum, so they don't have the two pieces to that pathway to get the full butyrate production, or vice versa. And so we actually also sell butyricum on its own. So if you're trying to solve this problem of the person's fine on their Akkermansia, but they're low in butyricum, this allows a practitioner to sort of decide where they want to really try to boost the microbiome. And so you can buy butyricum independently of the formulation. It alleviates GI discomfort, relieves occasional gas and bloating, and also helps with diarrhea and constipation. And I will say that Clostridium butyricum is a strain that is also sold by a company in Japan, but the dose is extremely low. So in order to reach the same impact and the same dose that is in one pill of this butyricum, you have to take 30 tablets daily of that other version. And so there's been a lot of studies done in Japan to show the positive impacts of Clostridium butyricum. And this is just a higher dose, which allows you to take one pill a day to get that same dose. And then, as I said, we also sell this polyphenol booster, which is comprised of a polyphenol blend of pomegranate, grapeseed, and green tea. And this has been shown to stimulate Akkermansia production. So the last sort of big topic beyond just these strains and how they can play a role in efficacy on these different pathways, I want to take a second to talk about stool testing, because this is something that there are a lot of stool tests on the market now. It's something that's really kind of growing in popularity. And I want to sort of give some guidance on where we are with stool tests and how you might think about stool tests pairing with these different probiotic strains. So the first thing to know about stool tests is there are different kinds. So there's basically three categories of stool tests. There are stool tests which use the technology of PCR and culturing. That enables you to look at, approximately 25 different microorganisms. There are microbiome tests which use qPCR, quantitative PCR, and you can get about double the number of microorganisms that you're looking at when you use qPCR. And then there's microbiome tests which are centered around DNA sequencing, in which you're looking at thousands and thousands of different microorganisms at once. Each of these tests kind of has pros and cons. It depends on what you're looking for. If you're really trying to get an understanding of, what is the forest? What are all the different fauna that are in this forest? DNA sequencing is great. You're going to get to see what are all the different microbes that are in a person's ecosystem. If you're very interested in specific strains, these qPCR-based tests are really what you want to look at, because they're going to quantitatively tell you how much of that strain that you're interested in are really there. It's like you're asking the question of what are all the different things that are in this forest versus how many four-leaf clovers are in this forest. If you want to know how many four-leaf clovers there are, you really want this qPCR-based test. And so one example of kind of what these test results look like is they will call out specific strains. And so this is an example of a stool test in which the person has come back and they're low in Akkermansia levels. And so low Akkermansia levels have been associated with a wide variety of indications, ranging from things like obesity and diabetes. And I've now shown you that you can actually supplement people with Akkermansia and formulations containing Akkermansia in order to address metabolic syndrome. But low Akkermansia levels have also been associated with things like inflammation, gut barrier dysfunction, bowel disease, even osteoporosis, and neurological disorders, including anxiety and depression. And so there have actually been a ton of studies showing the association between low levels of Akkermansia and a wide variety of systemic illnesses. So if you have a patient that is showing up low in Akkermansia and you're pairing that with some of these symptoms, and you believe that Akkermansia might be something that could help this person, The best way to increase Akkermansia is to simply give them Akkermansia, but then additionally combining Akkermansia with polyphenols as a bundle where you're giving them the polyphenols, which can help stimulate Akkermansia growth, is another way to kind of jumpstart Akkermansia growth because you're giving the Akkermansia food that kind of helps it. And then the other thing to know that people have done is if a person has extremely low levels of Akkermansia and you're trying to increase it in a short amount of time, some people are really doing a larger dose up front and then moving to a maintenance afterwards. And so there's a wide variety of ways in which you can use Akkermansia to boost levels in the gut. And I'll just make a couple of sort of caveat comments about stool microbiome testing here, which is to say that if there aren't really symptoms that you're trying to go after and you're going purely based off of a gut microbiome test, I think there's some risk with that, which is to say that you won't really know if you're improving some symptom if you're not actually treating a symptom. The second thing is that these microbiome tests are not currently regulated in the sense that there aren't standards in which data has to be generated and in which data has to be reported. And so if you kind of take one test and then another test, you don't really know how to compare those to each other. And even if you take one test and then that same test, you have to make sure that they've been standardized in the same way because that's really not regulated at the moment. The other kind of challenge to these microbiome tests is that even though we try to create these ranges of, healthy, unhealthy, and then too much, that's really looking across broad populations. And I think what we know for sure is that the microbiome, there's an individualized component to it. And so it's important to note that when these gut microbiome tests tell you where a patient is on that range, that's really across broad populations and may not be as relevant for that particular patient. Because what you really want to know is over time, what does a person's microbiome look like? And is there some new issue that's come up for them that is associated with a change in their microbiome? And without that longitudinal data, it's sort of hard to apply an individual situation to kind of these global population grade levels. And then one last caveat is that the transit time for people is different across individuals. And so when a person takes their gut microbiome test, when they take that stool sample, and even frankly, what part of the stool that they choose to send for the sample can actually influence the results as well. And so the most important thing is to kind of know the caveats of the gut microbiome test. Longitudinal data is kind of the best data to get on an individual in order to know if there's a microbiome change that has happened. But the more people that take these tests, the better the data will be. The more the standardization comes into play, the more important these tests will be in sort of helping to figure out guidance. On the converse side to low Akkermansia levels, high Akkermansia levels have been associated with longevity in the study that I showed you that looked at centennials. And high Akkermansia levels have also been associated with individuals who are fighting autoimmune diseases. And so if you have a patient that is showing high Akkermansia levels and you've got some phenotypes that you're trying to resolve, one of the ways to treat this is to give them polyphenols as opposed to necessarily giving them Akkermansia directly. So we know that polyphenols can help boost Akkermansia levels. And we also know that there's research showing that polyphenols are neuroprotective in conditions that are associated with high Akkermansia. And so you can upregulate Akkermansia levels, but also just increase simply the polyphenols that are going to help improve Akkermansia and have neuroprotective effects. Another really nice set of data that these stool tests show is not just the individual strain levels, but actually the small molecules that are produced by the strains. And we've talked about short chain fatty acids a few times here, but one of the most important things that your gut microbiome does is produce short chain fatty acids. And there are three primary types of short chain fatty acids. There's butyrate, acetate, and propionate. Each of them plays different roles, but they also actually are part of a pathway together, so they act in concert with each other. So it's really important to look at what is the level of short chain fatty acids that your patient is producing. And this is an example of a report in which this person appears to have, reasonable amounts of butyrate production and acetate, but low in propionate. And certainly butyrate has been known to play an important role in a wide variety of indications. And so if you have a patient that is low in butyrate and you want to tackle it through a gut microbiome solution, one of the most straightforward ways to do that is to give them Clostridium butyricum. As its name suggests, it produces butyrate. And so this is one way in which you can increase a person's butyrate production in a very specific way if they happen to be low in butyricum and low in butyrate production, and you're worried about a GI issue or a metabolic syndrome issue. This is one way in which you can kind of simply just give butyricum. You can certainly also supplement with prebiotics and soluble fiber, which also helps promote the growth of butyricum. The other strains that are really helpful for increasing butyrate levels are Clostridium beijerinki and Anaerobutyric hali. We don't sell those as individual strains, but you can find them in the formulations of Metabolic Daily as well as Pendulum Glucose Control. And so this is my last slide, sort of showing the lineup of all of these players next to each other. Again, Akkermansia is a single strain. Butyricum is a single strain. Both of those are part of the formulations that are in Metabolic Daily. And then the highest dose of Metabolic Daily is glucose control, which has been shown clinically to reduce A1C and blood glucose spikes in people with type 2 diabetes. And Metabolic Daily assists in the metabolism of sugars and carbs for people that are trying to improve the way their body metabolizes sugars. And then polyphenols are a booster that help with the growth of Akkermansia and have their own kind of independent health benefits. And so this is sort of the special today, which love to have people trial products, any number of these in different combinations. We'd love to hear from you how you're using the products and what you're seeing work in clinical practice. And to help get you started, there's a discount code here, WSRUPA40, and that gives you $40 off of your wholesale order to help hopefully make it easier to trial some of these products.
Colleen, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation. I'm going through Q&A right now. Even just trying to keep up with that is difficult. So I think it really shows just how important this conversation is and how much of an interest there is in this topic. And so I'll be sure to share out those details of the coupon code in the follow-up email in the next couple of days once we have the recording finished. But with that, and I know some of these were answered during the presentation, but we always like to go chronologically here, and it's always nice to hear information multiple times. But what are the issues or concerns if someone has too much Akkermansia on the GI map or a GI test, excuse me?
Yeah, I think the next question is kind of very much paired with that, which is what is the significance of having Akkermansia overgrowth? And I'll caveat everything by saying, I just showed you, we only found out Akkermansia existed in 2010. So this is all new science, and I'm sure there's a ton more that we don't know that trumps what we do know today. So, but based on what we know today, first of all, in the gut microbiome tests, as I mentioned, these are sort of global tests in which all the data across different populations of individuals are kind of lumped together. And so an individual might rank high on these tests, but it actually might not be meaningful for that person because you're really just comparing them to people that might have totally different microbiome settings than they do. It has been found that there are high levels of Akkermansia that are associated with people who are battling some of these neuroinflammatory disorders. And so the current hypothesis is that because Akkermansia plays this role in the immune response, as I mentioned, that actually Akkermansia is part of a feedback loop in which it is being increased in these individuals to help them with the neuroimmunological disorder that they're fighting. But totally new science. And I'm sure we're going to learn a ton more over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 10 years is not that long when you think about how much information has already been created for it. So super excited for the future of that. Where can people find the Pendulum products?
So there are a few different places you can get Pendulum. One is on our website at pendulumlife.com. There's also all these resources on the website where you can, if you just go there to learn, we have our papers on there, white papers. There's a special section dedicated to healthcare professionals where you can actually also learn about the clinical trials that we're involved with. And we love to interact with anybody who is trying these products or has questions or ideas, or if you want to run a clinical trial, where we'd love to help enable that. You can also find Pendulum on Amazon and on FullScript. So those are the three primary places.
I love it. I'm going to combine a couple questions on this one, but what is the dosage of Akkermansia and how long do you recommend taking it? Is it similar to a medium to long-term point where the supplementation would no longer be necessary, or is it something that would require taking it daily for a lifetime for some individuals?
Well, so in the Akkermansia that we currently sell, and maybe I'll just give a plug, like we're going to start offering different doses to HCPs. Stay tuned. But in the current dose, it is in the billions of AFUs. But probably more importantly is starting to think about, how do you bring this into practice? I think if you're trying to increase somebody's Akkermansia levels, we recommend 1 pill a day. Some practitioners are actually boosting that to 2 to 3 pills a day and pairing with the polyphenols to really give, a immediate jumpstart and boost to the supplementation of Akkermansia. One of the things that's known is that you can boost Akkermansia through a high polyphenol diet and also through a high fiber diet. And so I don't think it's necessary that you have to be on Akkermansia for the rest of your life. I hope none of my investors are on this call. But the fact is that if you were able to make a dietary change where you basically gave the patient Akkermansia and they could increase their dietary fiber and polyphenol intake, that should sustain the Akkermansia strain and allow it to continue to grow and thrive in their microbiome. There are some things outside of diet that can cause Akkermansia to become depleted. We know that as we age, we actually lose Akkermansia. We know that when people get certain infections, they lose Akkermansia. We know that when people go through periods of intense stress or anxiety, I don't know if anybody on this call has ever gone through that, but if you have, that's been associated with losing Akkermansia. And for us women, when we go through menopause, we actually lose Akkermansia. So there are other life things that kind of just happen to us that can cause us to lose the strain. But again, there might be this opportunity to kind of replenish and then maintain through diet.
That's, yeah, great answer. Big pomegranate really enjoyed that answer, I'm sure as well, knowing that they're still in. Why does elevated Akkermansia on the stool test imply inflammation?
Oh, sorry if I wasn't clear. I don't think that elevated Akkermansia implies inflammation. What I was saying is that there are publications showing that elevated levels of Akkermansia are associated with some of these things like multiple sclerosis. And so that's an association. And so I think that it does not, if somebody has elevated Akkermansia, I don't think that it necessarily implies that they have an inflammatory issue. But if you have a patient with inflammatory, heightened inflammation and high Akkermansia, you might be able to start putting the puzzle together there.
Yeah, that's great. Is Pendulum available in Canada as well?
I believe Pendulum is available in Canada through Amazon.
Beautiful. Let's see here. How long would it take for you to be able to see some restoration when it comes to leaky gut if you were to be taking Akkermansia?
Well, I think like with any other intervention, it kind of depends on the person. We have people who literally within days are reporting back, experiencing significant improvements. And then we have people who it takes months before they see an improvement. And actually, to tell you the truth, we have people who say they don't see an improvement and then they go off of it and they see things get worse. And so they realize, oh, actually, it was improving. It was just sort of subtly over time getting better and better. And so it sort of depends on, what's at the root cause of the GI issues. And that tends to be tied to how fast you start to see an improvement.
Yeah. I love this question actually came in immediately before you went to the polyphenols slide, but is taking Akkermansia supplements more effective or how does it compare to giving phenols or pomegranate?
We haven't done a head-to-head study of polyphenols versus Akkermansia. There are a fair number of studies showing that polyphenols act through increasing Akkermansia levels. And there's obviously other pathways by which polyphenols can be showing improvement. So that's why we kind of suggest that people pair the two together. But there hasn't been a head-to-head of, one being better than the other. But since they operate in the same pathway, you imagine there's some overlap there.
I love it. And chat, if you are asking questions in the chat, it's tough for us to keep up with that. So please use that Q&A button in your menu bar. Otherwise, that question might not be seen by us. So jumping back in, any concerns with glucose control or other diabetes meds when taking Akkermansia?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, I didn't mention this, but that clinical trial that I showed was in people with type 2 diabetes, and most of them were on metformin, and a few of them were also on sulfonylureas. It's very hard to find people with diabetes that are taking nothing. And then we have customers that are taking glucose control on top of insulin, as well as GLP-1s, and we haven't had any adverse reporting for that. And I think that most of those drugs don't act via the microbiome. The one that has kind of the most evidence that it might be is metformin. And we know that it increases efficacy. It lowers A1C and blood glucose spikes on top of the metformin efficacy.
How does one's dietary regimen, macronutrient ratio, and overall metabolic flexibility affect the amount of Akkermansia species?
Oh man, I wish I had someone from the RD team on this call. That's a question that is going to very quickly show my ignorance on that front. I will say that please reach out to our group through our website, pendulumlife.com, to give you a actual answer to your question. But I would just say at a high level, nutrition and the microbiome are very tightly paired with each other. We have a team of registered dietitians in our company that think about this all day and all night. And so please reach out to us so that they can give you an answer that the company can stand behind as opposed to what I'll say here.
I love that. And a quick little plug for reaching out to their team. Shout out to Jen, who's in the chat, and she just posted that email that you can reach out to as well.
Yeah, so then hcpinfo@pendulumlife.com. Thank you, Jen.
Yeah. And this might also be a tough one that you might not know the answer to as well, but have you seen this in impact at all with clients using colostomy bags?
Yeah, please email hcpinfo@pendulumlife.com. I actually don't know the answer to that, but someone on the team might.
Yeah, it's a very, very niche question. So definitely make sure we want to get the right answer for that one. So this one is, I understand Akkermansia decreases BS and A1C, But what is the mechanism of action? Basically, like, does it affect an increase in GLP-1 and increase in insulin release? Can you speak to that?
Yes. So the hypothesized mechanism of action is through stimulating butyrate production and GLP-1. And so that is it's actually acting through the GLP-1 pathway. I'll sort of share a funny story, which is that, we're always asking our customers, what are you experiencing? Share us back your A1C numbers and your blood glucose numbers. And one of the things that we got back that we weren't expecting was people were saying, I don't have sugar cravings anymore. I have reduced food cravings. And so that reduction in cravings was sort of always a little bit of a black box to us. But now that we understand how much GLP-1 can change that and how, prevalent that is, even in people that don't have diabetes, it seems pretty clear that that's probably how people are, that's probably why people are experiencing those benefits. And I, want to reiterate that this is a supplement and not a drug. And so we are not going toe to toe with Ozempic, but they are acting through the same pathway. And maybe one thing I will say too is that GLP-1 comes from the microbiome. So basically when you eat food, that these microbes in the gut respond to that food by stimulating GLP-1 production. But it comes from the L cells that are in the gut lining. And so by giving these probiotics, what you're doing is you're basically giving the natural upstream characters to GLP-1. And so the timing of which you eat and then stimulate this GLP-1 release is the natural timing. And drugs like Ozempic, the way that they act, and a lot of these are sort of, constant release, is sort of a heightened level of GLP-1 all the time. And so they're actually, in that way, they're not the same. So the drugs are actually increasing GLP-1 levels all the time. And these strains would be increasing GLP-1 levels, when you eat. So much more kind of like the way your body naturally increases GLP-1 levels.
Perfect. Is this supplement vegan?
Oh man, haven't really I should know the answer to that question. I think the answer is yes, although I have to go back and double check whether we have the certification. I mean, the answer is yes from like it's vegan in all the ingredients that we use and how we grow them, but I don't know if we have the certification, but I gotta go double check that.
There you go. Yeah, good answer. I was also pondering this one myself. Is something that you produce in your own body vegan? Yeah, I don't know. Animals. Is there a reason to just recommend Akkermansia versus the metabolic daily in the pre-DM metabolic syndrome population, or even in people without these conditions?
There's some reasons why practitioners choose to recommend Akkermansia over the formulation. One is that they might have somebody who has kind of sensitive GI, in which case you maybe like to do I like to step in, one step at a time with a patient. And so I'm going to start them with Akkermansia. And if they can tolerate that, kind of move them into the formulation. And then other folks prefer to start with the formulation because they want to have kind of all of those different functions going at it at once. And so this is really kind of a style thing. And then also what things you're worried about with that particular patient. And again, GI distress tends to be one of the reasons why practitioners maybe start with just Akkermansia, or they really suspect, hey man, the person's just low in Akkermansia. And so that would be another reason to just use that single strain.
Yeah, that makes sense. With undetectable levels of Akkermansia, what are higher doses that you might recommend?
It sort of depends on the individual, but what we've seen practitioners do is to pair Akkermansia with polyphenols and then sometimes start people out with 2 to 3 capsules a day as opposed to one a day, which is kind of what's written on the bottle. But that really is, I think, at your discretion. I mean, from a safety standpoint, a person could eat a whole bottle in one sitting and be fine. So it's really a question of, how do you want to tackle the problem of low Akkermansia?
Yeah, great. Depends on the individual always. So, how do we cause the Akkermansia to quote anchor? What physical activities, diet beyond phenol containing foods, or other lifestyle factors would you recommend?
I think what's known so far is that beyond polyphenols, high fiber diets are associated with increasing Akkermansia levels. And so increasing soluble fibers and increasing polyphenols appear to be the primary ways in which you can help Akkermansia colonize.
Yeah, this practitioner is looking for maybe just your definition of the microbiome. Do you mean it's only in the distal colon, or how do you call the rest of the bacteria in the gut?
Yeah, I'm kind of going off of sort of where people are kind of landing today, which is that the gut microbiome, when we use that phrase, it's really referring to the strains that are residing in the distal colon and interacting with each other in that particular ecosystem. But it's a fair question because, the microbiome goes beyond just the distal colon. It really is into the entire GI tract. We have microbes in our lungs. We have a microbiome in our nasal passages. We have microbiome on our skin. So it's fair. This phrase microbiome, maybe I'm like kind of living in my own little world of gut microbiome in the distal colon, but the microbiome is all over and inside of us. So it really does extend beyond that.
Yeah, we all live in our own little world. So,
That's true.
I can definitely understand that. Do babies receive akkermansia from their mother at birth?
Oh, it's a great question. There has been some evidence to suggest that there is akkermansia in mother's breast milk and that is a way in which it is transferred to babies. But that's, I think, infant microbiomes and how those evolve is still an area of active research.
Yeah, this is an interesting question. Would colonics or enemas directly or indirectly impact one's akkermansia levels in the gut microbiome in general? And if yes, how soon after the patient does that enema or colonic would it be appropriate to do the stool test for proper akkermansia detection?
Yeah, at a high level, generally speaking, any of these things that are intended to clear out the system, so antibiotics, these cleanses will ostensibly reduce kind of the quantities of all of the strains. I don't know if there have been specific studies looking at the impact to Akkermansia in particular, but one could imagine that, it's like other strains and it would be reduced through those. Certainly antibiotics can kill Akkermansia, that's known. And so the question about when to start supplementing with Akkermansia on the heels of that kind of a treatment is also a very interesting one. I used to tell people used to ask me like, "Oh, should I take these probiotics while I'm taking an antibiotic?" And I used to say, "That's crazy. That's like taking the thing when you know you're also taking something that's going to kill them." But actually, there have been a couple of recent studies coming out showing that if you start out with some of these strains, being high in some of these strains like Akkermansia, somehow as you're taking antibiotics, they actually help you sustain a healthy microbiome on the other side of those antibiotics. It's very early research. It's confusing why that should be the case since these antibiotics are killing all the strains in the microbiome. But I now retract my original opinion, which is to say, like, I don't know. I mean, maybe people should be taking these at the same time they're on antibiotics or doing a cleanse.
Yeah. How long does someone with diabetes need to take Akkermansia?
Again, I think this sort of depends on the individual. So if you are able to see your A1C go down and your blood glucose spikes go down, but you don't want to stay on Akkermansia, for long periods of time, I do think that diet and exercise are really well known to help reduce the symptoms of diabetes. And certainly if you go into a high fiber, high polyphenol diet, that's very well known to improve diabetes. And it's also feeding your Akkermansia. So it's certainly possible once you start to see those improvements and you've started to colonize Akkermansia in your gut, that you can switch back to just being kind of on a diet and exercise regimen and not have to keep taking pills.
Can you clarify your stance on, I guess, what polyphenols are doing in regards to Akkermansia? Are they upregulating and also downregulating?
Well, this is a little bit of the mystery of we know that there's data showing that polyphenols can increase Akkermansia levels. And we know that there's data showing that polyphenols can play an important role in metabolic syndrome. How polyphenols are increasing Akkermansia levels, there's a little bit of debate too. And one of the leading hypotheses that actually I think is what's happening is that polyphenols actually have a mild antibiotic effect. They can kill off some strains. And so what I think is happening is that when you take polyphenols, it's not so much that they're boosting Akkermansia as they are eliminating the competitors that are in the literally in the area. And so that enables Akkermansia to now to grow more prevalently. So, but I don't think that is solidified. That's a hypothesis.
Speaking of, do you have any thoughts for neurological conditions being associated with Akkermansia levels?
Yeah, so I think this question is now has come up a few times. So I mean, it's sort of the same thing that I said in the slides, which is that there are publications showing that these autoimmune diseases are associated with high levels of Akkermansia, and the current hypothesis is that because Akkermansia can help stimulate some of the things that the body might be trying to battle, that's the hypothesis of why Akkermansia is higher. It's actually having a protective effect. But again, like I want to be really clear, this is an early science. Those correlative studies are not the same as causation, which is not the same as curing. And so that puzzle is still being put together.
Yeah, thank you so much for clarifying that. Would low hydrochloric acid and digestive enzymes impact species?
Low hydrochloric acid and what?
Low hydrochloric acid, bile, and digestive enzymes impact the species somehow.
Hmm. I don't know. But I mean, I think if you imagine, some of those kind of acidic components would certainly, I mean, you would expect them to have some kind of an impact on the microbiome. I don't know what they would do to Akkermansia, but it's a good question.
We'll get a couple more questions and we could be here for another 4 hours if we wanted to. Can you speak to the benefit of Akkermansia with regards to efficacy with autoimmune therapy, oh, excuse me, immunotherapy and cancer treatments?
Yes, this is also in its very early stages, but there have been some publications to suggest that Akkermansia can somehow improve the efficacy of certain immuno-oncology drugs, and it's just specifically these checkpoint inhibitors. And we actually do have practitioners that are actively using Akkermansia along with their immuno-oncology treatments and seeing benefit in patients. There have also been publications and books talking about how these patients are low in Akkermansia, and so boosting Akkermansia can help them kind of thrive through the treatment. I think it's a huge opportunity, and I'll say, we're very interested in this and are stay tuned because we're definitely trying to enable studies in this field.
That's amazing. What steps can these practitioners share with their clients to ensure the highest amount of CFUs to make the end destination intact? Or do you, sorry, this is a bit of a confusing one. So, what steps can we share with our clients to ensure the highest amount of CFUs make it to the end destination intact and do their job to the fullest?
I think one of the important things is actually just the encapsulation, the capsule that these strains are in, because you need them to get through the stomach acid and through the GI tract to the distal colon, which is where you want them to kind of colonize, or that's where you want the pill to break open and the strains to start to take activity. And so we have, enteric coating as well as kind of a time release capsule, which tries to optimize for exactly that. One of the other things that can sometimes help is people taking the pills with food because food will essentially increase the pH of your stomach. And so that can also help these pills get through the stomach acid. And some people need to take foods with capsules because their stomachs are sensitive to just like to capsules in general. And so we often recommend that people do that as well. And so other than kind of being inquisitive around the capsule and then trying to take it with food to increase the pH of the stomach, I think those are really the two primary ways to optimize for that.
Does the supplement need to be refrigerated?
Pendulum glucose control does need to be refrigerated. All the other ones do not.
Okay. Last question is, does Akkermansia help with fungal overgrowth?
That's a super interesting question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
That is an interesting question. And then we'll give you a last great one. How can people get in touch with you to learn more about Pendulum
Oh,
and your product?
thank you. I think the best way is to email us at hcpinfo@pendulum. The other way is just to go to our website. There are lots of ways to contact us. And so and Jen has put into the chat box a direct link for people to be able to go and learn more and reach out to us with questions. And I just want to reiterate how much we love working with HCPs. And we're on a kind of exploratory journey together on how we can help people with these different products. And so we love to work in tandem with you. We love to hear how you're using these products. We love to hear your questions and work with you to answer them. We love to work with you on any clinical trials you'd like to run. We'd love to work with you if you have patients you want to put into clinical trials that we're running. So please, please, please reach out to us.
Oh my goodness. Colleen Cutcliffe, CEO and co-founder of Pendulum. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you to your fantastic team as well for helping get this set up. What we're going to do, folks, is we'll follow up, of course, with the recording and the slides and the discount code that we'll go ahead and share out. So stay tuned for that. Colleen, you are more than welcome to jump off because what I'm going to do is transition, or you can stay with us. But what I'm going to do is transition over to a quick demonstration of Rupa Health and show you how to order labs all in one place. I know there's 800 or some of you that signed up for this class, and some of you might not even know who Rupa Health is and what we do. And so what I'm going to do is show you exactly that. And so with that, y'all, my name is Adrian Martinez. For those of you who joined later, don't know who I am. I'm the head of practitioner partnerships here at Rupa Health. What we do here at Rupa is our job is to make sure that your life is a bit easier when it comes to lab testing and functional medicine. And we do that in a couple different ways. We are a one-stop shop when it comes to functional medicine. We work with over 30 different labs and over 3,000 tests all in one place. So instead of having to have multiple different accounts with all the labs you want to order tests from, you have one single sign-on. You have access to everything in one place on a free-to-access platform, as well as you can access all of your results in one place as well. Not only are we a one-stop shop for lab testing, we also want to create a ton of education. As you just witnessed with Pendulum and their fantastic team, we create education not only just for you as a practitioner to learn and understand supplements, but we also do lab testing and education surrounding that as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log into my dashboard here and show you exactly how simple it is. Creating an account on Rupa Health is completely free to do. You just go to rupahealth.com and you can sign up for free to get access to everything. From there, I can start an order for my patients. And when I'm ready to start that order, I just need the first name, last name, and email address of my patients. From there, I'm right in my order screen, right? And this is where I get access to all the different labs that I want to order from. I can create custom bundles, which are sets of tests from a combination of any lab that I want to order from. Down below, I can create a favorites list. So individual tests that I commonly order from any one of the labs that I want to work with everywhere from the GI tests that you want to do when you're going to use these Akkermansia supplements, right? And maybe I want to order a hormone test as well from Dutch. Click, click. If that's it, I click send to patient and my job's done. That's how simple it is to order from over 3,000 tests all in one place in a matter of seconds, as I just showed you. You can add ICD-10 codes and we'll automatically create a super bill for your patient so they can submit that to their insurance for potential reimbursement. You can add notes for the patient, notes for Rupa, and you even have the option of either paying for the tests yourself or you can allow us to manage billing directly with the patient, offloading one important aspect of that takes time out of your day. That's our goal here. Our goal here is to make your life easier when it comes to functional medicine. From there, let's talk about pricing. Like I said, Rupa Health is completely free to sign up for. We also charge the wholesale practitioner price. So the same price that you would get having an account directly with the labs, those are the same prices that we have here at Rupa Health. The way that we generate our revenue is simple. There's a 7% processing and ordering fee on each order, and that's paid for by whoever pays for the tests. So once you go ahead and do that, you click send to patient and we take it from there. Again, we will handle billing directly with the patient, or you can handle billing yourself and bill the patient separately. Once we do that, we'll reach out to the patient. We'll ship the kits to your patients. We'll send over instructions, FAQs, walk the patient through how to take the test, basically handle all of the whole patient experience, including coordinating phlebotomies, any specimen issues that reoccur. Again, we will offload all of the heavy lifting off your shoulders onto ours, and then you're alerted as the results come in. Once those results are in, you're able to track everything directly within your main dashboard here. I can download the results. I can send them to my patients. I can schedule clinical consultations. So if I do need some assistance interpreting the results, I do have the ability to schedule time directly with a clinician from the lab that I'm ordering from. And of course, I can mark that as reviewed once I've had the opportunity to review these results with my patients. Additionally, we even have some cool features that allow you to do result summaries. So if you want to create a patient-facing simplified PDF that calls out any outlying biomarkers that are received within the results, I can actually do that and visualize those biomarkers with my patients and show them, hey, these are above normal. Maybe these are in the normal range. These are below normal. What are the next steps involved in that? What are some tasks that we need to create? You can add your logo onto this. And what it does is it gives you an additional tool to make life a bit easier when you're trying to explain sometimes these complex results to your patients. Now, what you've seen so far is how you're ordering all your tests in one place, how you're managing all your results in one place. But as I said, Rupa is more than just a place where you're going to come and order all of your tests. We want to be a place that you can actually come and learn about all these tests as well. And so that's why we do education. We do boot camps. We partner with labs. So you can see that we have a diagnostics DSL GI map boot camp coming up very soon. Great timing for the GI map plug because we learned a little bit about how that plays in with Akkermansia today. But you can join one of these boot camps. It's a 6-week deep dive. You all experienced a live class today. Think about a live class basically spread over 6 weeks where you're able to interact with the practitioners who are experts in this field. So you can join a GI map boot camp. It comes with a GI map test that you can do on yourself and you can follow along with interpreting those results. This is a paid option and the only other paid option that we have here at Rupa Health beyond that 7%. We have a food allergies one coming up. Be sure to check it out. We have these live classes. You can see that we have one that we just did with Colleen, but we also have them coming up as well, a little bit more on the business side of things in early July. Can't believe we're getting to July already. But we also house them in a library as well. So you can see all of them that we've done with Dr. Silverman. We have Dr. Lavelle. We have doctors' data that we've done these with. So you have access to over 100 different live classes that we've done, as well as magazines. We have magazines and we have hundreds, if not thousands, of articles in our magazine already. We have a podcast. So beyond just somewhere where you're going to come and order all your tests, we want to give you the opportunity to come and learn about these very important topics that are happening within functional medicine. Right now, Rupa only does operate within the US, or rather for US patients. So you can sign up for free and get access if you're a US operating practitioner. Unfortunately, if you're international right now, we can't assist your patients, but you can still access Rupa Health to get this educational content. We have a lab shops as well. So what lab shops is essentially the ability for you to create an online marketplace that will show your patients what labs that you do offer, and your patients will be able to order those tests. So bypassing some steps that might improve the patient experience on your end by just getting these important tests in their hands a bit quicker. If you have questions on that, feel free to reach out to me there. And we even have things like food plans. So this is one of the cool features that we just rolled out. It's still in the beta, but let's say I want to create a plan for a patient. We can leverage AI to create a meal plan in a matter of seconds. 3 meals, 2 snacks, diet plan, anti-inflammatory, preferences, high protein, low carb, gluten-free, dietary restriction. Boom, generate that food plan. And you'll see here in about 20 seconds, we will have a full 7-day meal plan that's created. I can add calorie intakes, nutrition intakes. I can add a shopping list on this if I want. These are all free on our platform, which is pretty incredible. And there we go. 7-day meal plan created in a matter of seconds. And I can make edits to it if I need to take things out, add them, so on and so forth. And Rupa is more than just a place for like solo or small practitioners. We can also create a clinic style account where you can invite multiple practitioners, your staff. We can work with any size clinic that you want. And we also have multiple different EHR integrations as well. So if you're using an EHR, we can have an order with Rupa button built into that, and those results will flow directly into your patient files. We work with about 9 EHRs right now, including Practice Better, Elation, Optomantra, with more on the way. So my name is Adrian Martinez. I'm going to go ahead and share my information up here real quick. And I'm going to hop into the chat to see if there's any questions that came up for me. So here's my information here. And let's jump into the chat to see if there's anything that came in. What is the Rupa savings on the itemized bill? Great question, Lisa. So basically what Rupa savings is we charge the wholesale price. So most labs offer 2 different prices. They have a patient price as well as a practitioner price. So if you are a practitioner and you just send your patient directly to the lab to handle billing, oftentimes your patient's going to get a higher price. Whereas at Rupa, they're always going to get a lower price. And so that's what that Rupa savings is. So if I want to show you and just kind of if visualize what that looks like. So if your patients were to be going to directly to the lab to pay to buy this test, they would charge $500, whereas at Rupa, they're charged $300. So that's what that Rupa savings means. Let's see if there's anything in the chat that came in as well. What is the lab shop? Lab shop, I think I went over that, Janet, but basically what the lab shops is it's your ability to create an e-commerce site on your website that you can plug in. And so I can hop in and say, here's my lab shop. This is what we do here at my organization. And then from there, I can visit my store and I can basically have this plugged in and tied into my website and say, these are the tests that I offer from at my clinic. And if a patient wants to buy them straight off of this, they can do that. Your course will approve that if they're ordering under your license. So they're not just going to be able to order anything and everything off your license. It'll go through, you'll be able to approve that order. And that way the patients will be shipped directly the tests. So basically allowing them to get access to these tests that they want in a more effective manner asynchronously. Awesome, y'all. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Again, my name is Adrian Martinez. We'll go ahead and send out a recording of this. This is separate from the bundle page, correct? We'll send out a recording along with the slides, but if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend as well as enjoys the 4th of July holiday if you're here in America or even abroad, wherever you're at. Thanks, y'all. Hey, Alexis, my mom calls me A. Thank you. All right, y'all. Take it easy.